The Toyota Innova is a car that needs no introduction. It's been around since 2005, well, earlier still if you consider the Qualis to be part of the family, and in that time it has endeared itself to Indian families everywhere. But perhaps this new version does warrant a bit of a reintroduction. It's called the Innova Hycross, and though it still has the same familiar MPV shape, it marks the biggest departure from the traditional Innova formula that we've seen yet. Today I'm going to drive the car, look at it on the outside and the inside, all its great features and its advanced hybrid tech, and tell you if it lives up to that legendary Innova name. The major change is that the Innova has shifted from the tough body-on-frame IMV platform shared with the Fortuner with its longitudinal engine and rear-wheel drive to the more car-like TNGA-C platform with a transverse engine and front-wheel drive that's more closely related to the Camry. It's also much larger than the previous car and crucially gets a 100 mm longer wheelbase. And of course there's no diesel engine here, and instead a petrol or a petrol hybrid, and it's the hybrid we're driving today. We'll get to what all this means in a moment, but first let's start with something simpler, the way it looks. Now, while the look of this car is very recognizably Innova and there are a lot of familiar details, some things have changed, and the idea was to make it look a lot more SUV-like. It starts with the grille, which is very bold and got this nice pattern to it. I should point out that this car is loaded with a lot of aftermarket accessories, so there's a lot more chrome than on the standard car. It's got these nice DRLs down in the bumper, LED headlamps, and over to the side you'll see a little bit more flare in the wheel arches and a bit more sculpture down the doors. You also get larger 18-inch wheels now, but compared to the butchness of the car on the whole, they do look a little bit meek and don't fill up these arches quite as well as we'd have liked. Over to the back, you will see that the window line now drops down and rather than kinking upwards, and that's more in keeping with the SUV styling theme. Over here, you'll find that characteristic curve over the rear wheels that you remember from the Crista, and around the back there are wraparound LED tail lamps, of course the new Hycross badge and the hybrid badge over on that side. So it's a bit MPV and a bit SUV too, but what do you think about the Hycross's new look? Tell us in the comments section below, and in case you haven't done so already, like this video and subscribe to the channel. We have awesome new automotive content up here daily. Before we hop in though, let's take a quick look at what they've done with the boot on this Innova Hycross. Practicality is always important in an MPV and always has been really good in an Innova. That hasn't changed this time around. And as you can see, even with all three rows up, you do get a considerable amount of boot space. You can definitely put in a whole lot of small bags for the weekend in here. But if you really fold the back seats down, which is easily done, you get as much as 990 liters of boot space, and that's really a lot. The other new thing is that the tailgate is powered, which is a nice premium touch. And of course, as before, the spare tire is down there. I'm itching to know what the new hybrid powertrain is like to drive, but before I can do that, we need to talk about the interior. And this is an Innova, so there is a lot of it. The interior of the Innova Hycross is a pleasant departure from the previous car and looks far more modern and upmarket. For one, the dashboard flows a little bit more than that upright dash you used to get in the old Innova Crista, and it is dominated by this 10-inch touchscreen that sits nice and high up. More on that in a moment. They've also made a great use of soft touch materials up here, over here, and yes, on the door pads as well. However, I will say that some of the other plastics around the cabin, such as over here and down here, aren't quite as good. And yes, there is an improvement in the roof liner compared to before, but it does still feel a little bit cheap. It's not all bad though, and the general cabin ambience is quite upmarket. There's a good use of color, like that dark chestnut trim that Toyota calls it, used liberally on the upholstery, on the dashboard and even on the door cards. And there's also piano black and brushed aluminium all over the place that breaks the monotony and makes it look a little bit more premium. Plastic quality, like I said, there are some slightly disappointing bits, but overall you get a nice solid hard wearing feel from everything you touch. And the steering wheel wrapped in leather does feel nice and premium. What I also like about the steering is that it is adjustable for rake and reach. Means even shorter passengers can get quite comfy here. And overall it's a great tall driving position that makes you feel like you're in an SUV and not just an MPV. there's not a whole lot of storage. There are 2 cup holders here and this bin, which oddly opens only one way and to the side, so if your passenger wants to access it, they're out of luck. There are some big door bins, but they're located quite low, and apart from that, there's not a whole lot of storage. There is a slight tray above the glove box here, which houses a wireless phone charger, but that is a dealer level accessory. Now over to the touchscreen. Yes, it is nice and big and it's placed high up in your line of sight, but some might find that a little bit distracting because it does close off a bit of vision off the road. But more to the point, it is quite basic. Yes, it has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Apple CarPlay is wireless even, but you'd want to use those 2 softwares because the standard software is a bit lackluster. There's no onboard navigation for one, and it all looks just a little too basic. What is nice is this 7-inch color screen over here. It's very informative, houses all sorts of stuff, including the speedo, trip computer, and ADAS features and how they're working at any given time. More importantly though, for those getting used to hybrids for the first time, it provides a very neat graphic of how the power is being made, where it's going and where it's coming from. And boy, have they really upped the features game in this car. There are loads of things like the screens I already mentioned. There's auto climate control with 2 zones, one for the front, one for the rear. There's a power driver's seat with memory, and both front seats are ventilated. Here's a list of all the equipment available on the top spec Innova Hycross. They also managed to address one of our biggest pet peeves from the old car. USB ports are something we criticized the previous Innova Krista for being lacking in, but here they've addressed that. There are 2 right here up front, a Type A and a Type C, and there are more USB ports in the back. But one thing I do really like is that they've retained a lot of physical buttons. Call me old-fashioned, but it's nice to have buttons exactly where you remember them. Makes it a lot easier to use while you're on the move. But you know, a lot of owners are going to be chauffeured around in their Innovas, and to that end, Toyota has really gone to town on the second row. Now, as you probably may have noticed, the step into this Innova Hycross is much easier than it was in the old Innova Krista, and that's because of the monocoque construction. The floor isn't quite as high off the ground as it is in the ladder frame Krista. And once you're here, well, there's a whole lot to talk about. Let's start with the panoramic sunroof. What a difference it makes. Lets in so much light and makes it feel really airy. There's also some neat ambient lighting that goes with it. That means the AC vents have moved from where they used to be in the center over to the side, and that's actually okay. These vents are a little bit flimsy, to be honest, but they let you direct air directly where you need it to go, and it works quite effectively, I'm happy to report. You also get your own climate zone back here, so you can set the temperature for the rear half of the cabin, and there are 2 USB Type-C ports. You also get this handy manually applied sunshade, which is really handy because it's a big window. It lets in a lot of light, so you can block that out if you don't want it. Then there's the center console, which again, if you don't want it, can be folded down. It's attached to this seat, but when it's in place, there's a nice little spot to keep your cell phone, and 2 cup holders and 2 bag hooks. And finally, onto the seat itself. It's a nice big chest, surprisingly low set. I would have expected it to be a little bit higher. This does obstruct your view just a little bit, but that small complaint aside, it's quite comfy and it's part powered. Now the powered bit lets you recline your seat, which is very handy, and it goes all the way back like a business class seat. It's very, very good. You can have a nap here. And the other thing that's powered is this ottoman, which comes out from the seat base and really adds to that business class feel. But the trouble is, as you can probably tell, if you do that, there's no place for your feet. You can manually slide this all the way back, but even then, there's not a lot of room to tuck your toes. As it's fully extended, it kind of feels a bit compromised. So what you're going to have to do if you're sat in this seat is ask your chauffeur to push the front passenger seat all the way forward so you can really stretch out. That's the only way this system really works. But once it's in place, boy, is it relaxing. Now, with it pushed all the way back like I have it right now, room is just immense. It's amazing for the chauffeur driven if you're just alone. But what about if you want to get in the third row? For that, I think I'll bring it back to a middle position and go check it out. Now, to get into the third row, you can slide this forward on its rails, but for the backrest, you have to rely on the powered system. Once you're happy with enough room there is, you can just walk in. It's much easier to get into than the previous Innova. And pull on this, tug it back and set it to a nice, let's say, middle position. I think that's good. Again, if you want to pull this back, you have to rely on the powered system, but you let the passenger in front do that. And then you notice there is loads and loads of space. This, incidentally, is placed for 3, not just 2. And Toyota makes sure you know that with the third seat belt that comes out of the roof. Thigh support may be a little lacking, but by third row standards, it is tremendous. The seat isn't so close to the ground anymore because, well, again, thanks to the monocoque chassis, the floor is a lot lower, so you don't sit as knees up as you did before, and it is really quite a comfy place to be. I'm quite astonished at the space back here. Knee room also, even if you push this further back, should still be good, and there is enough place for your feet underneath. The 2 big cup holders over here, and you get your own AC vent that points to the third row passengers. It's really a very, very comfortable place, and when Toyota says this is an 8-seater with a bench seat in front, they really mean it. And yes, you can fit 3 adults in the third row. And with the help of some of Toyota's senior management, we filled all the seats quite comfortably. So, if you get the bench seat for the middle row, the new Innova is a proper 8-seater. So we know it's practical like an Innova should be. Now let's hit the road and take a crack at that new hybrid powertrain, shall we? Now one thing I'm happy to report that they've maintained from the Innova Krista to the Hycross is the driving position. It's still very tall, you get a great view forward, and you get to lord over everybody else from the driver's seat. When they said they made it more like an SUV, they weren't kidding. It's not just the high seating position, but also the long bonnet that stretches out horizontally in front of you. Everything in the driver's environment feels decidedly less utilitarian, even the way the dashboard is laid out. And the first thing you notice on the move is the steering, which has now gone from a hydraulic power steering setup to an electric power steering setup. Now that immediately feels less utilitarian. You can tell you've moved from a light pickup truck chassis to a car-like monocoque chassis with this one. It's light and makes this huge car really maneuverable at low speeds, but out here on the highway where I am right now, it still feels nice and secure when you're going 3-digit speeds. Now the other way this very obviously differs from previous Innovas is the powertrain. Now yes, Innovas have had petrol powertrains before, but this petrol hybrid is something entirely different. It uses the 2-litre transversely mounted naturally aspirated petrol engine that runs the Atkinson cycle for better efficiency. And this is mated to 2 electric motors, an integrated starter generator and another one that drives the wheels. Power is channeled to the front wheels via a planetary gearbox. For a start, because this is a strong hybrid, much like the Camry or the Prius or the Hyrider or even the Velfire, it can be driven in electric mode only. In fact, if you have enough charge in the battery, that's the way it starts up. Completely silent, completely electric. And around town, there's a surprising amount of e-driving you can do before the motor kicks in. It actually changes quite frequently depending on the position of the accelerator pedal. Even out on the highway, if there's minimal load and you take your foot off the accelerator, it will switch to EV mode. There's a handy graphic here to show you the state of power, whether it's charging, whether you're driving in eco mode or whether you're using full power. It's all very helpful and helps you understand the strong hybrid system better. Now the switches between EV mode, hybrid mode and petrol only mode are pretty seamless in that you don't really notice the step when it changes over, but what you can definitely notice is when the petrol engine comes on, because it can be quite loud. Now what fans of the previous Innova will definitely miss is that solid mid-range punch you got from that diesel engine. Well, actually from the petrol engine as well, because the old 2.7 litre petrol did have a really meaty mid-range. This petrol engine is more high revving, it's far more linear in its power delivery, and yes, out on the highway when you're overtaking, you do miss some of that whack that you used to get in the low and mid ranges. It does sort of compensate for that with a little bit of e-boost, and you can feel that e-boost especially low down. But yeah, it's not the same effortless cruiser out on the highway that the old Innova used to be. Being a strong hybrid, it absolutely excels in urban conditions. Toyota says it can do 50 to 60% of city driving in EV mode, and they might be right. The 1.6 kilowatt-hour nickel metal hydride battery always seems to have enough charge left, and even when it runs low, it quickly tops back up with a brief running of the engine. Of course, we didn't get a chance to do a proper efficiency test, but even with our frantic shoot driving, it regularly showed upwards of 14 kpl on the dials, at one point even going to 18. Its ARAR rating of 21.1 kpl and claimed range of over 1,000 kilometers seem more than attainable then. The other big change when moving from a ladder frame chassis to a monocoque chassis is the way this car rides. The old ladder frame Innovas had a very robust, solid feel out on the highway, and that's what endeared them to customers so very much. So how have they handled it here? Well, this car has an independent McPherson strut setup up front and a torsion beam rear suspension setup. The good news is it has retained much of that solid feel out here on the highway. It seems quite unflustered by high speed shakes and bumps, and yes, you don't get that steering shock that you used to get with the old hydraulic steering over sharp bumps at high speeds. And they've deliberately kept the ride a little bit on the firm side and not too soft because they didn't want to compromise on that high speed stability. So yes, if you're a fan of the Innova, rest assured that this one drives as solidly as the old one did. The wheel size has moved up to 18 inches, but that has also meant a slightly lower profile tire. So yeah, the amount of rubber between the rim and the road is a little bit less, and yes, you can feel that just a little bit on sharper edged bumps. Overall though, the tuning of the suspension does make up for that a great deal because it's not as firm as the previous Innova, and they've really worked out a great balance between ride comfort and stability with this new Innova Hycross. Amongst the many new feature additions to the Innova Hycross, one that really needs to be talked about is ADAS. Yes, this car comes with advanced driver assistance systems with a lot of sensors that take care of a lot of different things. These include adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, auto adaptive high beam, rear cross traffic alert, lane trace assist, and even collision mitigation. It's not overly intrusive, which of course you don't want on our Indian roads and our Indian conditions, which can be quite erratic. It's very helpful without being in your face, and that's really good. Unfortunately, our time with the Hycross was all too brief, and there is a lot more we would still like to test. Like the handling, although we can tell you it's far easier to maneuver despite having grown bigger, with a tight turning circle and not too much body roll. We also want to test how it copes with hills under a full load, and do proper fuel efficiency and performance tests, but those will just have to wait until we get the car on our home turf. On first impressions then, the Innova has moved up in the world in an unexpected but pleasantly impressive way. It's altogether more spacious, luxurious, feature-packed and modern, and though they've made it comfier and easier to drive, it feels no less reassuring and solid at high speeds. Die-hard fans might need a bit more convincing on the new hybrid powertrain, which misses that all-important mid-range punch. But we feel like they'll warm to it once they see the incredible fuel economy it is capable of. The Innova Hycross won't come cheap. We expect prices to start at about 22 lakh rupees ex-showroom for the petrol model, going up to about 30 lakh for the fully loaded hybrid. But then Innovas have always gotten more and more expensive, haven't they? And that's never stopped its die-hard fans from flocking to showrooms seeking out the next one. The Innova legend certainly lives on in the new Hycross, and Toyota seems to have yet another ace up its sleeve.